The gavel of the emergency HOA meeting slammed down and Carrie Whitfield's voice cracked through the microphone like a whip. "That eyesore contraption does not belong on community property," she snapped, pointing at my wheelchair ramp like it was a crime scene. I sat there, stunned, watching 30 neighbors go silent as she ordered maintenance to haul my spare wheelchair straight to the dumpster. Little did she know, this single act of cruelty would be the spark that burned her entire reign to the ground. My name is Daniel Reyes, and 6 months earlier, I moved into Willowbrook Estates believing it would finally feel like home. After the accident that took the use of my legs, I needed a quiet, accessible neighborhood, and Willowbrook seemed perfect on paper. I didn't know yet that perfect on paper and run by Carrie Whitfield were two very different things. Carrie had been HOA president for 11 years, and everyone treated her like a small-town queen with a clipboard. She wore pearls to mow her own lawn, if you can believe that, just to look presentable while berating a landscaper. My neighbor Delia warned me on my first week, "Keep your fence 6 inches from code, or she'll make your life hell." I laughed it off then. I had no idea how literal that warning was about to become. The first violation notice came within a month. My wheelchair ramp, built by a licensed contractor, was cited for unapproved design. I explained, calmly, that federal law protected reasonable accommodations for disabled residents under the Fair Housing Act. Carrie smiled thinly and said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Reyes. Even federal ones need HOA approval around here." That sentence alone should have told every lawyer in America exactly how this story would end. I filed the paperwork anyway, hoping to avoid conflict, hoping decency still meant something in this gated slice of suburbia. Weeks passed. My mailbox filled with fines, $40 for a non-compliant ramp angle, $60 for a visible medical device. A medical device. My wheelchair, sitting in my own garage. Somehow that violated the aesthetic standards of Willowbrook Estates. I started keeping a folder. Just receipts and notices at first. Nothing dramatic, just quiet documentation, a habit from my old job as an insurance adjuster. That folder would become my most powerful weapon, though I didn't know it yet. Spring turned the neighborhood green, and Carrie's obsession with control seemed to bloom right alongside it. She fined the Kowalskis for unauthorized tomato plants. She fined a widow for a wind chime that was too loud for the ambience. Everyone complained quietly at the mailbox, then went home and paid, because fighting Carrie felt like fighting a hurricane with an umbrella. I understood their fear. Karen had friends on the county code board, or so the rumor went, spread like gospel over backyard fences. But rumors are not evidence, and evidence was exactly what I intended to collect. One Tuesday, I wheeled myself to the mailbox and found a notice taped directly to my door. Remove wheelchair storage unit or face suspension of HOA privileges. Suspension of privileges. As if using the community pool required her royal permission and not, basic human dignity. I called the HOA office. The woman on the phone, Marisol, sounded exhausted before I even finished my sentence. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reyes. Carrie handles disability accommodations personally," she whispered, like it was a secret worth risking her job over. Personally. That word would haunt this entire ordeal, because personally meant without oversight, and without oversight meant unchecked. I requested a formal accommodation hearing, citing the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act by name. Carrie responded with a 2-line email. Denied. HOA aesthetic guidelines supersede outside regulations within our private community. I read that line 4 times. A private HOA claiming to override federal disability law. Bold. Reckless. Beautifully, legally reckless. I saved the email. Then I forwarded it to myself, my sister who's a paralegal, and a folder labeled simply, "Evidence." That night, I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder and sharper, the calm of a man who finally sees the whole board. Because Carrie Whitfield had just put her arrogance in writing, and writing doesn't disappear when you wish it away. The following week, my backup wheelchair, the manual one I kept for physical therapy days, sat outside for exactly 11 minutes while I unloaded groceries. 11 minutes. That's all it took for Carrie to march over with 2 maintenance men and order it thrown in the dumpster. Community standards, Mr. Reyes? she said, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting my own stunned face back at me. I watched two grown men lift my $4,200 medical equipment and toss it into a dumpster like a broken lawn chair. Something in me went very, very quiet. Not defeated. Focused. I didn't argue with her that day. I simply pulled out my phone and started recording, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. "Say that again," I said calmly. "For the camera." Karen's face flickered, just for a second, with something between fury and fear, though she recovered fast. "This community has standards," she repeated, louder this time, playing to the small crowd gathering near the mailboxes. Little did the onlookers know, one of them was already texting a local news tip line before Carrie even finished her sentence. That evening, I drove to the dumpster myself and photographed the wheelchair, cracked frame and all, resting atop garbage bags. I photographed the serial number. I photographed the purchase receipt beside it for comparison. I photographed everything. Then I called my sister, Priya, who had spent 6 years litigating disability discrimination cases before switching to paralegal work. "Danny," she said after I explained everything, "you don't have a complaint here. You have a lawsuit." Those words settled into my chest like ballast, steady and grounding after months of feeling unmoored in my own neighborhood. We began building the case that very night, cataloging every fine, every denied accommodation, every discriminatory email. 14 violation notices in 5 months, 11 directly referencing my medical equipment as an aesthetic problem. The Fair Housing Act doesn't care about HOA bylaws. Federal law simply does not bend to Carrie Whitfield's pearl necklace. But I wasn't ready to file yet. I wanted more. I wanted the pattern, not just my case, laid bare for everyone to see. So I did something Carrie never expected from the quiet man in Unit 14. I started talking to my neighbors. Delia had 3 fines for an unauthorized garden gnome, she said, reminded her of her late husband. The Kowalskis had been threatened with lien filings over a fence stain that was, by their contractor's own report, code compliant. One by one, stories surfaced, quiet resentments nobody dared organize because organizing against Carrie felt like organizing against a storm. I told them all the same thing. Storms don't fear umbrellas, but storms absolutely fear lightning rods with lawyers attached. Over the next 3 weeks, I became something I never planned to be, the reluctant architect of a neighborhood rebellion. Not with picket signs or shouting matches, but with something far more dangerous to someone like Carrie, organized paperwork. Priya helped me draft a formal FHA/ADA complaint, and we quietly gathered 7 other residents willing to add sworn statements. Each statement painted the same portrait. Selective enforcement, unequal fines, and a president who treated the bylaws as her personal scepter. Meanwhile, Carrie remained blissfully unaware, still strutting through the neighborhood like nothing could touch her. She even sent a mass email bragging about restoring order and elegance to Willowbrook, attaching a photo of my empty ramp. That email became Exhibit C. Karen was, without realizing it, building our case for us. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. Not even me. Marisol, the HOA office assistant, called me on her personal cell, voice trembling. "I have documents you need to see, Mr. Reyes." We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, far from Willowbrook's watchful hedges and gossiping porches. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were financial records showing HOA fine money routed to an account under Carrie's maiden name. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just discrimination anymore. This was embezzlement, hiding in plain sight behind pearl necklaces and clipboards. "She's been doing it for years," Marisol whispered. "Nobody checks. The board is just her sister and 2 friends." Suddenly, every unjust fine made a horrifying kind of sense. They weren't about aesthetic standards at all. They were about cash flow. My destroyed wheelchair had literally funded someone's personal spending. Dollar for cruel dollar. I thanked Marisol, promised her anonymity, and drove home gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. That night, Priya and I restructured the entire complaint. This was no longer just a disability case. This was fraud. We looped in a real estate attorney, Grant Ferris, who specialized in HOA governance disputes, and, conveniently, loved an underdog story. This is a slam dunk, Grant said, flipping through Marisol's documents. Breach of fiduciary duty, discrimination, and misappropriation. For the first time in months, I let myself smile. Not out of relief, but out of quiet, controlled anticipation. Carrie, of course, sensed nothing. She was too busy planning the neighborhood's annual Community Excellence Gala, her personal coronation. She even proposed a new bylaw banning visible mobility aids from common areas, calling them unsightly clutter in the official minutes. I attended that meeting in person, wheelchair and all, sitting in the front row while she read the proposal aloud. The room went dead silent. Even her closest allies shifted uncomfortably in their folding chairs. "Any objections?" Carrie asked, clearly expecting none, scanning the room with the confidence of a woman who'd never lost anything. I raised my hand. Just one. That proposal violates federal disability law, and I have the paperwork to prove it. Her smile twitched. "This is a private community matter, Mr. Reyes, not a courtroom." "Not yet," I said, calm as still water. "But it will be very soon." Gasps rippled through the room. Delia squeezed my shoulder from 2 seats away, smiling for the first time in months. Carrie adjourned the meeting early, her heels clicking sharply against the tile as she stormed out without another word. That night, Grant filed our formal complaint with HUD, the Federal Housing Authority, citing pattern discrimination and retaliation. Simultaneously, we submitted the financial evidence to the state's HOA Oversight Division, requesting an independent audit. Carrie had no idea 2 separate investigations were now quietly closing in on her from opposite directions. The next morning, she sent me a personal email, the first one not written in bureaucratic HOA speak. "Let's talk, Daniel. Man to man or woman to man. No lawyers. We can work this out privately." I almost laughed out loud. She thought this was still about hurt feelings, not federal law and missing money. I forwarded her email straight to Grant, who replied with one line, "Do not meet her alone. Ever." I declined her offer in writing, calmly, professionally, and copied Priya and Grant on every single word. Karen's tone shifted overnight. Sugar to venom in one paragraph. "You'll regret dragging this community's name through the mud." I saved that too. Threats make excellent exhibits, especially when typed in all capital letters at 11 at night. 2 days later, a routine property inspector showed up at my door, sent, coincidentally, by a friend of Carrie's on the county board. He cited my ramp for a supposed drainage violation, despite it passing inspection just 4 months earlier. I smiled and handed him copies of the original inspection report, my HUD complaint number, and my attorney's business card. He left within 6 minutes, visibly rattled, muttering something about getting back to me later. He never called back. Some fires, once you show them the extinguisher, simply lose their nerve. Word began spreading through Willowbrook faster than any HOA newsletter ever could. Carrie was under investigation. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now knocked on my door, quietly offering their own stories, their own evidence. The Kowalskis brought 7 years of fine receipts. Delia brought a recording of Carrie threatening to make her life difficult. Our case file grew from one folder to an entire banker's box, thick with the quiet cruelty of 11 years unchecked. Then, the twist that changed everything. Priya discovered Carrie wasn't even the HOA's original founding president. She had pushed out the real founder, an elderly man named Walter Higgins, through a medical incapacity clause nobody remembered voting on. Walter, it turned out, was very much alive, very sharp, and very, very angry when Priya tracked him down. "She forged my resignation letter," Walter said flatly over the phone, voice trembling with 11 years of buried rage. Another exhibit. Another crack spreading across Carrie's carefully polished facade of authority and control. We now had discrimination, fraud, and forged legal documents, a trifecta no HOA president could survive. Grant scheduled mediation, required before any lawsuit could proceed, and Carrie arrived looking uncharacteristically pale. She brought her own attorney, a nervous young man who clearly hadn't been briefed on the full scope of the evidence. When Grant laid out the HUD complaint, the financial records, and Walter's forged resignation, The young attorney went white. Carrie, for the first time in this entire saga, said absolutely nothing at all. Mediation ended in 20 minutes. Her attorney requested a private recess and Carrie stormed out to the parking lot alone. The following weeks moved fast, the kind of fast that only happens once dominoes start truly falling. HUD confirmed our discrimination complaint had reasonable cause, a rare and serious designation that opens the door to federal litigation. The state HOA Oversight Division launched a full financial audit, freezing the community association's bank accounts pending review. Carrie could no longer touch a single dollar of HOA money, and suddenly, all those urgent maintenance fees mysteriously stopped. Willowbrook residents received a certified letter announcing an emergency board meeting, this one not called by Carrie. Walter Higgins, reinstated by court order as founding president, called the meeting himself, gavel firmly back in rightful hands. The community center was packed that night, folding chairs dragged in from storage, every resident wanting a front row seat. Carrie arrived 20 minutes late, sunglasses on indoors, as if hiding her eyes might hide everything else too. Walter opened calmly. "We're here tonight to discuss serious allegations against Carrie Whitfield's conduct as HOA president." One by one, residents stood and read their statements. Fines, threats, forged documents, discrimination, all of it, finally spoken aloud. Delia's voice shook as she described Carrie threatening to have her wind chime removed by force if she didn't comply. The Kowalskis presented 7 years of receipts, totaling over $11,000 in what auditors called improperly assessed fines. Then it was my turn. I wheeled to the front of the room, folder in my lap, camera footage queued up on the projector. I played the video. Carrie's voice, crisp and cold. "This community has standards," as two men tossed my wheelchair like trash. Gasps echoed through the room, even from residents who'd already heard the story secondhand a dozen times over. "That wheelchair," I said quietly, "cost $4,200. It was destroyed because it offended her aesthetic." I laid out the HUD finding, the frozen accounts and Walter's forged resignation letter, page by damning page. Carrie finally stood, voice sharp, defensive. "Everything I did was to protect this community's property values." "By stealing from it?" Walter asked simply, holding up the bank statements showing HOA funds routed to her personal account. The room erupted, not with shouting, exactly, but with the low, furious murmur of 11 years of silence finally breaking. Carrie's attorney, sensing disaster, whispered urgently in her ear, but she waved him off, red-faced and unraveling. "You people have no idea how much work I put into this neighborhood," she snapped, her composure finally, fully cracking. "We know exactly how much work," I said. "We have the receipts." Literally. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, sharp and cathartic, the first real laugh Willowbrook had shared in years. Walter called for an immediate vote of no confidence. The result? Unanimous, save for Carrie's own vote and her sister's. Carrie Whitfield was formally removed as HOA president that night, stripped of every title she'd hoarded for over a decade. But removal from a volunteer board was nowhere near the end of what was coming for her. 2 weeks later, the state audit concluded. Over $47,000 in HOA funds misappropriated across 5 years, meticulously documented. Criminal referral followed swiftly, embezzlement charges filed by the county district attorney's office within the month. Simultaneously, my HUD complaint escalated into a formal federal lawsuit, Grant Ferris leading with quiet, methodical confidence. Carrie hired a bigger attorney, a slicker one, the kind who bills by the minute and rarely returns calls quickly. It didn't matter. Video evidence, financial records, and 11 sworn statements don't care how expensive your lawyer is. Depositions began in autumn and Carrie's story shifted 3 different times, each version more tangled than the last. First, she claimed she never ordered the wheelchair destroyed. Then video proved otherwise, time-stamped and undeniable. Next, she claimed ignorance of federal disability law. Grant produced her own email. "Federal rules need HOA approval around here." Finally, she claimed the misappropriated funds were administrative reimbursements, a defense her own accountant refused to support under oath. Watching her unravel should have felt vindictive and small, but honestly, it mostly just felt like watching gravity work. Some people build houses on sand and call it a foundation. Eventually, the tide simply does what tides do. Settlement talks began in early winter. Carrie's attorney suddenly eager to avoid a public jury trial. Grant refused to budge below a number that reflected not just my wheelchair, but 11 years of Willowbrook's suffering. The final settlement conference took place on a gray December morning, frost still clinging to the courthouse steps. Carrie sat across the table. No pearls this time, no confident smirk, just a tired woman facing consequences she'd dodged for years. Grant laid out our terms plainly. Full restitution for my wheelchair, damages for discrimination and formal admission of fault. Her attorney tried to negotiate the number down. Grant simply slid the video transcript across the table without a word. This community has standards. Carrie's own recorded voice repeated in the silent room, damning as ever. Her attorney sighed and nodded. There would be no more negotiating that particular line out of existence. 167. The final civil settlement totaled $15,000 for my wheelchair and associated medical costs, paid entirely from Carrie's personal funds. An additional $32,000 was ordered in damages to the other affected residents, distributed according to documented harm. Separately, the criminal embezzlement case moved forward, Carrie pleading no contest to avoid a lengthy public trial. She received 18 months probation, mandatory restitution of the full $47,000, and a permanent ban from any HOA leadership role statewide. Permanent ban. The woman who ruled Willowbrook like a private kingdom could never again hold a clipboard of power. I remember reading that clause 3 times, letting the relief settle slowly into muscles I hadn't realized were tense for months. The gala she'd once planned as her personal coronation instead became Willowbrook's first genuinely joyful community celebration. Walter Higgins, rightfully reinstated, opened the event with a simple toast. To standards. The real kind this time. Delia brought 3 new wind chimes, hanging them proudly from her porch without a single fine in sight. The Kowalskis planted a full vegetable garden, tomatoes and all, right where the old violation notice used to sit. My new wheelchair, sleek and fully funded by Carrie's own settlement check, rolled smoothly down a ramp nobody dared question anymore. Marisol kept her job, now reporting to an actual functioning board with actual oversight and actual accountability. I never saw Carrie again after the settlement, though I heard she moved 2 counties over, starting fresh under a different name. Some habits, though, apparently don't move away so easily. 6 months later, Walter forwarded me a news clipping from her new town's local paper, and I nearly choked on my coffee. Carrie Whitfield, now going by her maiden name, had been elected secretary of a small book club's Community Standards Committee. The article mentioned, almost as a footnote, a resident complaint about excessive fines for a garden statue. Old habits really do die hard, apparently, even after $47,000 in restitution and a permanent statewide leadership ban. I framed that article and hung it in my hallway, right beside a photo of my old, destroyed wheelchair. Not out of cruelty, but as a reminder of what quiet documentation and patient resolve can accomplish against unchecked power. Willowbrook Estates elected a new board that spring, 3 residents, myself included, running on a single simple platform. Transparency, accountability, and, as Delia liked to joke at every meeting, actual respect for wind chimes. We rewrote the bylaws that year, adding explicit disability accommodation language pulled directly from federal statute. No future president, no matter how many pearls she owned, would ever again call federal law optional around here. I think about that day at the dumpster sometimes, watching 2 men toss my wheelchair like garbage, Carrie smiling behind sunglasses. It was the worst moment of my time in that neighborhood and somehow, looking back, also the beginning of the best. Because that single act of casual cruelty lit a fuse Carrie never saw coming. 1 folder, 1 statement, 1 twist at a time. She thought power meant never being questioned. I learned power actually means never stopping to ask the right questions. Delia says I should write a book about it all someday. Maybe I will once the ramp outside gets a little more worn in. For now, I just will down it every morning. Past a garden nobody finds anymore, into a neighborhood finally quietly free. Justice, I learned, rarely arrives with fireworks. Usually, it just shows up quietly, in a manila folder waiting patiently. And sometimes the loudest victories are the ones that end in silence. A woman with no more clipboards, no more kingdoms. Just a permanent ban, a restitution check, and a neighborhood that finally, rightfully, belongs to everyone in it.